right, we are live and we are about to begin our third roundtable of the day. This is one of the roundtables that I have been waiting for because this is the ladies' roundtable, and I am so excited to hear from our amazing, incredible moderator, KaNisa Williams. She always asks the best questions, so I know that she's going to ask some hard questions for the ladies. And we have Miss TLC, we have Rhonda, Nicole, we have Taunja, we have Tonya, we have Laura. And I am going to get off the stage because we've been going over because there's so much to talk about. And I'm just going to allow KaNisa to take it away.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. So we have our ladies panel. Shout out to my shirt by Miss Rashida Coleman with the ladies on it. But today we have a lot of questions to get through. And as D'Angela said, we have been going over, so we're going to just get started. So usually I would do introductions. But what I'm going to ask my first question. So say who you are, quick, brief intro, and then answer the question, okay? So, question number 1. Diamonds and Pearls was one of Prince's best-selling non-soundtrack albums, while also not being heralded as his most innovative work. What about this album and its promotion do you think turned this album into such a big hit? And we can start with Miss TLC.
Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where everybody is. Just quickly, I am an industry veteran. I've worked everywhere from MTV, Arista, Jive, spent a long time in my career at Universal. But I am a consultant that hopes to provide some industry perspective, usually when I'm speaking about Prince. I am extremely grateful for D'Angela for putting together symposiums and conferences and podcasts and celebrations so that we can all gather together and present our perspectives. Specifically about Diamonds and Pearls, I think that the success, and I think this was touched on in the last panel as well, was really attributed to the fact that Prince was open to doing more press and having more of a mainstream presence with this album. I think there's been a debate on whether or not it's considered a comeback or whether it was the industry or whether it was himself who actually propelled it to that place. And I know that there's certain benchmarks in his career, which I've referenced in, previous panels with Purple Rain, with Diamonds and Pearls, with Musicology, where it was intentional. It was something where he knew that there were, peers of his that were getting more flash and promotion and bigger deals. And as much as he didn't care to really play the game, he didn't care about the trophies and the larger numbers of the contracts, people were advising him that if you want to be as independent as you want to be in the future, you need to play the game now. So you will get that money that you can put into your own projects, your own artists, into Paisley. So just do it. Like, just give into it every once in a while. Come out, remind people who you are, sell a bunch, do your appearances, play the game, and then you can go back to doing what you want. So I do think that had a lot to do with it, that he was willing to cooperate at this period. And part of that was influenced by other artists getting that shine, getting those larger deals, getting that attention.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not going to point people out. So people jump in as you are ready to answer the question.
I guess I can take that one. In terms of promotion of Diamonds and Pearls, I think looking at 1991, I was just checking to see what songs were a big deal in that year. And it was really the time when hip hop was really starting to crest as a national mainstream genre. And so it was interesting seeing this transition start to happen in that year between sort of what I would call classic R&B into hip hop, and then with Prince in the middle. And so I looked at the songs that came out that year. I Love Your Smile by Shanice was big. Summertime by Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince came out. There were a lot of songs that we now see as kind of foundational R&B in that era. And so with Prince coming through with Diamonds and Pearls, by that time, Prince was a bona fide superstar. He was somebody who was known to the public and part of pop culture. So when it came to promote the album, I don't think at that point you necessarily needed to go heavy and hard on promoting Prince, because particularly as it came to the Black community, he was already iconic at that point and in line with the Janet Jacksons and the Michael Jacksons and all of those people that we really enjoyed. But again, looking at these kind of R&B and hip hop hits, Tribe Called Quest came out that year as well. It's interesting to see him in context of that because of the album coming out so late in the year. So I'm just wondering, when it came to thinking about promotion, of course, they're going to throw the money and the promotion and all those things around Prince as they did in those days with radio, with heavy postering and all that kind of stuff, and probably industry parties and promotions and all of those things. But radio played a really huge role in that particular era. And so I'm pretty sure that there was some on the ground promotion going on with radio. And that's one of the reasons why when we say that Diamonds and Pearls was a mainstream album for Prince, it was also that Diamonds and Pearls was a radio friendly song based on what else was going on in that era. But I also just think Prince was kind of at that point such a superstar that people, and particularly I would say the African-American audience at that point, were like, oh, new Prince album, great. Okay, this is just another thing that's happening that we're going to embrace that he's doing, because people loved him at that. This is pre a lot of the other things that happened during his career. And so it feels to me like this was almost kind of a return to his roots in a sense. I always see Prince in different eras. So these are my personal eras. There's Rockstar Prince, then there is Funky Prince, and that's the Prince of the 90s. And then there's Pious Prince, and then there's Elder Prince. And those are the kind of eras that I think that we see through his career. So this was the dawn of super funky Black Prince. And so in terms of promotion, I don't think that once that record hit radio and people hearing a voice like Rosie's on it, I think that was really just like, okay, you know what? We got something here, and it's gonna resonate with the community that has always supported him.
Okay, Tonya, and you didn't introduce yourself.
So you know what? I was so enthusiastic to get right to it. I'm Tonya Pendleton. I am a broadcaster. I am a writer, and I have also worked in the music industry. Started out my career working in radio, and then at Def Jam and at Arista Records. And so I have been all around the music business through journalism and even started my career in radio. And in Black radio specifically, then and now.
Thank you. Who's next?
All right, I'll jump in. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening. I know we're all over the planet. My name is Rhonda Nicole. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer, music journalist, and digital marketer, all of those things. So this is an interesting question because I was 16 when this album came out. So I don't remember, I don't really have a strong foundational understanding of the marketing and all of that perspective, because one, that was long before I was in the industry, but also because everything was just happening and I was also going through my teenage thing, so whatever. But what I do remember is all the videos. I remember obviously, seeing Prince on television everywhere, the Friday Night Videos show, Arsenio, the VMAs, the Soul Train Awards, all of that was happening. I have all of that somewhere on VHS tapes at my mom's house, I'm fairly certain. And then, of course, just the real time of being able to go and buy Diamonds and Pearls on cassette, because I don't think I had a CD player yet. I might have, I don't remember. But I definitely know that this is an album that I didn't physically own on CD until several years later. So I know that I had it on cassette. And I just remember going from that Graffiti Bridge era, if you will, and being very much into that, very keyed in, very excited about not only the Graffiti Bridge album and movie, but Pandemonium. I went to Performing Arts High School, and am starting to think now about whether or not that made a difference with how I, as a very young person at the time, interacted with the music, because so many of my peers were there. So yes, we were listening to Lenny and Sinead and everything that was popular then, but we were also very keyed in to these, you know, quote unquote older artists at this point. And then, you know, Diamonds and Pearls just being very revelatory. And I remember the first time I listened to it, taking a bubble bath, which is, you know, very Princey, and listened to the entire album in the tub. And by the time we got to Live for Love, I was just like hype and making a mess. My mom was like, what is happening? So I don't really know, you know, in terms of how the marketing worked, I can't really answer that question, but I know that it was effective, because especially at that time, when there were so many other popular forms of music, with hip hop, you know, really coming into a dominant space, and you have all these other things happening with alternative and grunge and pop and so forth, for this album and the singles from it and Prince's presence to hit the way that it did, whatever they were doing and however much money they were throwing behind the marketing, it was extremely effective.
I'll hop in.
Okay.
Oh, or Tonya, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Taunja. I am a creative consultant, and I work with visual artists. I help them with marketing and licensing deals and means to find other ways to bring in revenue. What I remember mostly about the promotion of Diamonds and Pearls, there was not a moment or a second that it was not put in your face. I feel like at the time, and during this time, I was in school for marketing, and I was in school for marketing for the business of music. So I was deep and drenched in what was going on at that time. Just really going back and thinking about it, you think about the Get Off performance, you think about how he did not tour the US, but he did a pop-up show at Jack the Rapper, which was huge. And that was an industry insider conference. So a lot of people didn't have access to it, but he did show up, which is something that, you know, a lot of mainstream artists did not have the opportunity to perform like he did. And that was one of his ways that he promoted it. You think about the white labels that he did with Get Off. How brilliant is that, to deliver these to the core people who are going to make your music listenable, and to share that music that way. I think when we talk about this album being a hip hop album, that's a whole nother discussion that I'll get into later. But the promotion aspect of it, having street teams and doing that type of things, I think he definitely dove into the world of how hip hop was promoted and used those tools to promote this R&B album.
So I'm Laura Tiebert. I am the co-author of a biography of Prince called The Rise of Prince, and it was published in 2017. My co-author is Alex Hahn. So thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. I think going last, the one thing I maybe could contribute to this is from my day job. I actually work in marketing, and unless you have good content, you have nothing to promote. And I really feel that with this album, Prince had really tapped into the zeitgeist of the times, you know, back in the early 90s, right? There was a war going on. Another thing that people forget is we were in a recession in 1991. I mean, it was severe enough that a lot of people were losing jobs. You know, there were real estate wasn't getting sold. I mean, there was a lot of we were really kind of in a difficult time in the early 90s. So I think Prince, the messages on this album feel so empowering and positive, and even like the yellow color, right, is such a color of joy and positivity and optimism and hope. And I just feel like it was truly the content of this album. I mean, to give all credit to Prince, yes, there is a fantastic marketing machine, but they're nothing without the content to market. So that's why I think this album was such a success.
Thank you, Laura. And I do want to kind of talk more about that because we get so spun up around Prince as an artist and like, oh my God, Prince did these amazing things. But there's a machine behind Prince so that he could do those amazing things. So this is kind of for the people who were closer to the industry. From your experience, what kind of promotional activities do you think were via the label, like an A&R type thing, and what were deals made directly with Prince?
So I know that I just want to also clarify that I was never at Warner Brothers. So I'm not saying that, specifically that I know for sure. But what ends up happening, as, all of the ladies that have worked in the industry know, you bounce around to different places and all the same people work with the same people at different times. So when I would be at other labels down the line, I started interning in the industry in 97, 98. And then I started working at MTV in 99 after I graduated NYU's music business program. And so at that time, then throughout the early 2000s, a lot of the people that I worked with were older than me, and they had worked with Prince and they had interacted with Prince in previous incarnations for other eras and other albums. And of course, I was the type of person that was just a sponge and I had a million questions and I would want to sit in people's offices, especially as an intern, and just say, tell me everything. And so one of the main components that people may know or they may not be as privy to if you've worked outside of the industry is that a large part of what makes something a success is that cooperation from the artist. And I know that there's a lot of negativity that's always hurled at labels and label execs, and I understand why. But it's always like they should have done this and they messed this up, and they don't know the other side, that there was a meeting that went down or a conversation where an artist may say, I want this, this, and this, and I want this budget, and I want to be number one, and I want to be the headliner of this award show, and I want to do this. But then when the label replies, okay, so you're going to have to do, this press tour, you're going to have to sit down with, this radio station, and you're going to have to do this, and they say, no, I don't want to do that, then that kind of falls apart. And so in this era, there was that pitch, of course, to say we can take this to the next level and we can make this a wider outreach if you're going to do some talk shows, if you're going to do an award show, those kinds of things. So with the MTV appearance, I know that one of those components that makes an artist decide whether or not they want to do something is also the host. And in this case, it was like having that connection of a friend agreeing to do the Arsenio show. Arsenio hosted when he did the Get Off performance. There was that collaboration behind the scenes that it was like, okay, I'll do it for this. So there were some things that were really ideas that the label had come up with, the marketing team that already knew that Prince really wanted to focus and dig in and elevate with this project. But then there's other stuff that, the artists on their own, they are talking to their own friends and making their own connections and coming back to the label and saying, okay, well, my friend has agreed to host this show, or they're going to invite me on their new talk show. I mean, the version of that nowadays is with podcasting, and people will say, well, my friend has this podcast and I'll do that, and if you can take that as a jump off and then that'll lead to other opportunities, then we'll do that. But as, Tonya even mentioned before, Prince didn't need people to first get up to speed with who he was. It was like, all right, if I have a project coming out, everyone's going to want to do something with me. Everyone's going to invite me on their show. But it was more so than back in Prince's court to say, well, which ones are you interested in doing? Which ones are okay with you? And so then because he also agreed to do the VMA performance, then MTV was willing to run a lot of the MTV news blurbs. They were giving Diamonds and Pearls more of that, like it was the initial story. Every time the little typewriter came up and, Kurt Loder was ready to talk about the news, in that little news break, Diamonds and Pearls was getting a lot of attention because it's a game. It's like, if you're going to do our show, then we'll give you this. We'll give you this airtime. Okay, well, if you're going to do this show, then we can give you the connection to this show. And so those components were all originally discussed with the label and with Prince, because it was like, all right, I'll do it because it's my friends and because, as long as you allow me to have the creative space to do what type of performance I want to do,
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that because one of the things that is important, I think, for people who were not around in that era to understand, it's so different than the way that it was so different now than the way that it was then. Records were really broken at radio, and that's at pop radio, at Black radio. And in particular, I would imagine that this album, there was a lot of effort at Black radio to push it because this was seen as a project that could be played on Black radio. Not that the other ones weren't, but Diamonds and Pearls, obviously the title track, is that kind of big R&B ballad with a big voiced female vocalist that you're going to see that is played very often on Black radio. And again, just looking at some of the hits from 1991, you've got Tony, 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 Whatever You Want, that was out. You've got Boys to Men, Motown Philly, which is crazy that all these things happened in the same year, because I'm looking at this list of songs. Gladys Knight was on the charts. Whitney Houston was on the charts. Mariah Carey, Phyllis Hyman, all these people. Was really quite a mix of people who were established R&B acts that were sort of, they probably didn't realize that at the time, their era of music was kind of phasing out and this new thing was coming in with hip hop. So when you look at how artists are promoted now, you're looking at social media for the most part. You're looking at these huge fan bases that are going on there. They're supporting these artists. You're looking at a machine that has been established over all of these decades to break these artists in a different kind of way than back then, where you're really doing radio and TV, but your critical key is radio. And because people now don't understand that power of radio, because why would you? No one really listens to radio. And the other thing is to think about all this music that I just referenced in 1981. More people listen to the same artists and the same songs. That is why you had these enormous sales, because people were buying music, but also because this is coming through radio, this is coming through TV appearances, this is coming through magazines, but you have so much less content that you have now. Now you have 100 channels, you have YouTube, you have Instagram, you have Facebook. None of that was available in that era. So people, if you look at it, you might say it might have been a more honest promotion, but it was people, literal physical people going in a marketing department at Warner Brothers that probably had Prince in the pop department. So another thing to understand back then, if you were a Black artist, let's say you were the Rude Boys. They had a big hit in 1991, Written All Over Your Face. They were, and Rhonda will remind me, because I forget whether it was Gerald Levert's cousins or they were a group that was related to Gerald Levert. And of course, Gerald Levert being the great singer and son of Eddie Levert from the OJ. So again, this is generational. So the Rude Boys would have a hit that would be considered a Black hit, and it would be worked by the Black department at the labels, and it would be worked at Black radio. I know that sounds so segregationist now, but just bear with me, because that's really what the reality was back then. So, I mean, and honestly, there's a lot of that even to this day, but you would take a song like that and it would go through that department, go through Black radio. They would literally come to the radio stations, make their appearances. They probably would sign at record stores, et cetera, and so forth. That's how you promoted a record then. And of course, they might do spot dates, or they may be on tour with another bigger artist, or they might just go from town to town, appear at radio in the morning, and then do a concert at a club or something at night. Now, if you're taking an artist like a Prince, who's already a superstar, Prince may not have been worked by the quote unquote Black department at Warner Brothers, because he probably was in the pop department, similar to what Lenny Kravitz just complained about, that he did not get invited to Black award shows. That's because Lenny was probably never worked by a Black department because of what they considered his genre of music. So on Diamonds and Pearls, I would assume, though, throughout Prince's career, when the records made sense for Black radio, that they would have a promotion team that would work the records at Black radio. So where Prince would maybe not be going to the club and doing a date, he may have done some radio interviews for it, but more than likely they would have worked him magazines, newspaper interviews, TV, and radio, but not necessarily him needing to be at the stations in order to promote the album. So it really was going to be a campaign that the probably the pop and Black departments worked on, came up with who was going to do what, and then literal promoters would go out to radio stations and work those records based on, can we get this on? Can we get this on the radio, first of all? And then how often is it going to be played? And then what are we going to do with the promotion and the marketing? And there would be posters and there might be giveaways and all those kinds of things. So I would imagine that some of that marketing campaign around Prince, with radio being the focus, was also TV, magazines, and all of those things. But again, you got to realize these artists that were selling millions of records, no social media. So things were word of mouth, you touring, you on radio, interviews on radio, coming out, and you see Prince doing those record store signings early on in his career as well. So all the ways that you could bring an artist to the people, that is how they would have put a promotion and marketing team together in order to make and break this record.
I'll just say one just really quick thing. I just wanted to say that point about there being less to distract you is a huge one in this day and age. You used to be able to walk into a record store, and when I was interning at MTV, and you had when I was at the 1515 building, and you had the gigantic Virgin Megastore across the street, I would spend every single lunch break, every single open amount of time over there. You have to remember that these stores back in the day had the racks of like, here's the top 10, like they were herding people towards, this is what's big, this is what you listen to. Put the headphones on, check out this album, and you're going to pick one of these up. As opposed to now where, you see it when everyone starts posting their Spotify Wrapped, there's thousands and thousands of different subgenres and what people want to hone in on, their favorite artist that they're listening to. It's harder to get everyone to pay attention to just one thing, much less one genre. And when you have someone like Prince who was showing everyone, well, I can do all of that, it actually became more confusing for the consumer. For us, we love it. And we love to use those examples when you're trying to, convert your friends into the community. But it's harder to get people that kind of grew up in that era to understand that there is no one genre, there is no one path to Prince. You kind of have to be an exploratory person that loves that diverse background.
I had to just step in 1 second and mention, someone mentioned it in the chat, BET cannot be underrated in how important it was to Prince's career, and also many other artists as well. But BET, MTV, those were the music channels at the time that actually then played music. And they were instrumental in making sure that these artists got TV time. I'm sure deals were made when you were talking in terms of the original question, with Prince making deals. Prince probably sat down with whoever it was at the time. Probably, I know he had conversations with Bob Johnson at one point. I don't know if it was on that album, but whoever was the top executive at BET to say, hey, you know what, or Prince or his people sat there and said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to be on there, we're going to have advertising a key role. But BET, in giving so much attention to these artists that weren't going to end up on MTV, the aforementioned Rude Boys probably were not going to be on MTV, but they were going to be on BET. Shanice, as mainstream a hit as that became, I'm sure that probably broke via BET and Black radio. And Boyz II Men, certainly, that was here in Philadelphia when Boyz II Men broke. And that was a hit that started in Black radio and then mainstream because it just became such a big record. And then they became such a big group. But those music channels, BET, people had their issues with BET, but also award shows, interview shows, playing the videos themselves on rotation, and how much was your song going to be played in rotation was also very, very key to breaking an album and breaking an artist back then, and then promoting them once they were big and keeping them in the public eye.
Thank you for that analysis. I think it's super important for people to understand what it does it really take to make a Diamonds and Pearls happen. Okay, so moving on. A critique that Prince got about the early New Power generation is that his band and presentation seemed to be dominated by male energy, despite the fact that Rosie was there. Do you agree with this critique? Why or why not? And I'm going to start with Taunja.
For me, I would say yes. It was something that kind of threw me off with this album when I first started looking at the visuals for it, because I felt like it was somewhat of a contradiction. Um, Especially when you saw the video for Diamonds and Pearls. It was all about this love for women, and it was such a soft image of him. But then you turn around and then you have another image of him that was completely like, to me, as I saw, as a turn of this hyper masculinity that did not, to me, seem very genuine. I'm just going to be 100% transparent. It just didn't resonate to me, and it didn't connect for me. And it somewhat started a disconnection from me to his music and to his imagery. To me, this album was such a Gemini moment, because I feel like there was two different Princes that we were looking at and hearing. We were hearing this soft, gentle Prince that, loved everything about love, but then you would have this image of him with the roller skates, and just it to me, it just they did not connect to me. And it was a disconnection for me. That's the best way I can explain it.
I wondered too, it's interesting. You talk about the disconnect because in Prince's memoir, The Beautiful Ones, he made mention of something really interesting about the North Side. I don't know if anyone remembers, but he said the North Side was very masculine, had very masculine energy, whereas the South Side of Minneapolis had more feminine energy. And so thinking, about what we've talked about these last 2 days about the band and where the origins of the band, right? Like Prince was going back to the North Side in large part in creating this new version of the NPG. And I wonder if this is just a reflection, right, of that masculine energy that Prince talked about from Northside Minneapolis.
I do think as well that there was a small kind of connection to, and again, this is just my random thought about it, but we all are aware that he had, such, kind of sarcasm towards the fame and the attention that, Jam and Lewis had with Janet at that time, and the explosion of all of the hits that he would, play a little bit of certain melodies during his shows and say, who wrote that? And, I think that in the late 80s, there definitely was that point where he was seeing the success that Janet had and thinking to himself, like, but I could do that too. And I pretty much already did that. And I need to remind people that that imagery of the time was real, because this was us and these were the boys that I grew up with, and this is my heritage as well. And I feel like his response then was to kind of show like a new 90s version of that. Like, I could do that too. And so yes, there was that pull back to that hyper masculine image, just because it was that like tongue-in-cheek reference to that.
I wanted to jump in because it's interesting. This is a great question. Again, I was a teenager when this album came out. And so it didn't feel like there was a shift, probably because I wasn't noticing those things as much at 16 as I would several years later. So I didn't really necessarily interpret it as a shift from feminine to masculine energy. What I did notice was that TDK Game Boys reminded me a lot of the boys at school. Obviously they were not necessarily wearing the same kinds of clothes, but the style of clothing, the way that they were dressing, absolutely their haircuts, their hairstyles. There were boys in my class who wore their hair like Damon, but who weren't necessarily, listening to Prince and the New Power Generation at that moment. So there was a very interesting connectedness, because what the guys with Prince were wearing and the presentation reminded me of Cross Colors and FUBU and whatever was popular back in the day. The other thing that was interesting is I'm thinking specifically about the image of Prince and with diamond and pearl on either side, and they're both kind of leaning back. And for some reason, that image evokes the Ice-T album cover where he's got the sisters in the bikinis or whatever with the machine guns or whatever it was. And it felt like kind of a Prince take on that type of vibe. So it never really felt like he was just swinging fully masculine or anything like that, because Rosie was there, because Diamond and Pearl were there, and so forth. But it certainly was a different presentation of his interactions with other Black men as compared to what we saw at the very beginning of his career with Dez and Andre, and then with, you know, Brown Mark and Dez, and, you know, so forth and so on, and how that all kind of evolves. We start to, I think, at least for me, to notice it more in the parade era, you know, with Wally and Jerome, you know, and so forth. And sorry, I'm blanking on names today, but, you know, just the way that he's now having a different kind of interaction where it's not just him and the girls, it's him and the fellas. And so my appreciation for that now is much more significant because I am aware of it more. But I definitely at that time felt like, oh, okay, these guys look like the guys that I know. So that was a really interesting moment for me in thinking about this question and how it, you know, kind of all brings it all together with this particular SDE.
So I was in my 20s when Diamonds and Pearls came out, and I had just moved to Philly, and I had like my first well, I started out in radio, but then I also became the entertainment reporter for the Philadelphia Tribune. And so this was a time of enormous change for me, and for me becoming, you know, in my young womanhood and all of that. But I think when it comes to thinking of Prince in the context of the times again, you're talking about this burgeoning movement of hip hop. So I grew up in New York City, and the way that men presented themselves were, you know, I always think of, when I think of a guy from the 80s in a big down jacket with Timberlands on, a big hat, sheepskins were big, all those kinds of things. And so there was always, coming out of hip hop, and really because the music industry is what it is, this hyper masculine vibe that was only accentuated by the fact that hip hop was this rebellious kind of, you know, for lack of a better reference, rock and roll for young Black men that were coming out and expressing themselves and talking about the crime that they dealt with and their feelings about Black power and also their domination of women in a lot of cases. So for us on the East Coast, we may have looked at Prince and said, okay, this is his version of that, where he's wearing do-rags that are matching do-rags to his outfits and all this, and he's throwing a guitar or two up on top of this and making it funky at the same time. But I don't think in real time, we weren't thinking about any of this. I can tell you that in real time, it was like, yes, Prince. Okay, this is the funky Prince we're dealing with now. So we're happy. It's like, yes, everything that's going along with it is familiar to you. If you're someone who is listening to R&B and you're listening to hip hop, this is nothing that is out of the realm for you. So with Diamonds and Pearls coming through, and also the aesthetic of diamonds and pearls, this would be a theme of luxury and of acquisition of material things that would start to permeate hip hop from then and going forward, even though hip hop was so much more balanced back then. And so that ethos of luxury, of jewelry and diamonds and beautiful women and dancing and partying and all those things that go on this album, and the different kinds of vibes that are on there, I don't think I ever thought of them as hyper masculine, because you had Rosie being such a dominant part of this whole album project, and you had Diamond and Pearl, and then Prince was just always someone who was associated with women one way or another, that I don't think that you stopped to think that the band was anything but funkier, not necessarily more masculine in its presentation. And, you know, when you look at Prince and you look at all the things that he was doing and wearing at the time, you know, Prince was hyper masculine in a sense, but then he was wearing the diamonds and the pearls himself and still sexy. And so it was just a good mix of masculine energy, feminine energy, and funk. that we all, I think, appreciated for what it was, and probably didn't parse out any difference in the energy that seriously.
And think about how ahead of the time he always was, because all the men are wearing pearl necklaces now. Like now it's fully accepted. There's so many pearl references being sold to men nowadays. But I love your point with the diamonds and pearls, the lush decadence and all that. I did always look at it as, pearls are considered more conservative. They're all, super expensive, luxurious items with the diamonds and pearls, but diamonds were always kind of placed in that context of being flashier and showing that you have all this money and you want to sparkle and make a statement when you walk in the room, whereas pearls are not going to sparkle when you walk in the room, but people who are in the know that they're expensive as well. I love both of those elements.
I love it. And you guys started to talk more about diamond and pearl, so I do want to talk about them too, because they were part of a large visual presentation for this time. But back then, how prevalent did they really seem? Because like we don't see them yet in the Glam Slam show. We just have Maite and Rosie. But what was their inclusion's impact on you personally, and how it contributed to this time?
To be honest, none. I wasn't aware of them in real time. And I think the most I remember is just them being part of the hologram that I think I stared at and played with and went back and forth with a million times. But otherwise, I'm sorry to say, I didn't even realize their name, that Prince had named them Diamond and Pearl. I had zero recognition. For me, it was more like all about Rosie and Prince and the band.
Same. I was certainly aware of them. I saw them, but I can't say, especially compared to the influence that other women who had worked with Prince had. Sheila had an influence on me. Wendy and Lisa, Denise, Jill, all of these brilliant women who were gorgeous, yes, but they did something specific. Kat was a phenomenal dancer, and she brought this amazing energy to his shows that we'd never had before. We had Bonnie, who was killing it vocally, and to me, Rosie was very much an extension of what we didn't get enough of with Bonnie. And so Diamond and Pearl, I was like, okay, but what do y'all do? You get to hear them talk in the beginning of the Get Off video, and still it's like, oh, okay. Even back then for me, I was like, all right, they're part of this thing, but they're not really. And so I didn't really connect them to anything substantial. Still to this day, don't really connect them to anything substantial except the visuals. And I'm sure that there was some kind of brilliance behind why they were positioned the way that they were. But other than that, I think that maybe that was the point, that they were just supposed to be part of a visual presentation, but not necessarily part of anything musical that we would really be able to sink our teeth into.
That's what I think it is. I agree with that part. I loved them for the look. I loved them as the dancers with him in Get Off. I loved the choreography in Get Off. But granted, I was in junior high. I was 13 when Diamonds and Pearls came out. So I had, the poster on my wall and just loved the look of the trio and just looked at them as this, package deal that I got where he was going with it, that it just looked cool to have these, women flanking him at all times. But I know that us later on as a collective community appreciating Prince and his music and what he did with other proteges, like then they fall out of the conversation because that's not where they went with him.
I just think Prince, I was sitting here and in my mind, I was thinking Black, white, Puerto Rican, everybody just a freaking good times are rolling, because they just seemed to be part of his visual presentation that included women of all backgrounds, colors, and some more prominent than others, obviously, as time went on. But, you expected Prince once again in this Diamonds and Pearls ethos and this Get Off ethos. You expected some women to be in there somewhere. And if they were part of the packaging of this project. It was just, okay, they're providing these great visuals, and it's part of this entire mood and vibe around this album. And interesting though, that Diamonds and Pearls, that they were part of this imagery, when this is an album that is considered to be one of his one of the ones that is probably more popular within the Black community. So I think Prince was always working with contradictions in his Gemini way. And so parsing through all of this, you do say to yourself, now that I think about it, that is kind of interesting. But during the time of Prince that we're talking about it, and that encompasses his whole career, I just think he just did so many different kinds of things. So you were just constantly going from one thing to the next, because he was constantly going from one thing to next, and you followed along with it, and it was part of the overall thing. And you just were like, okay, well, this is where he's at this point. So I see them as being part of the promotion and the visuals and all of that. And I don't think anybody really thought much more about it than that at the time, or even now.
I like that he did it again years later with Maya and Nandy, but then they were integrated more into it. Like, then he had kind of a different vision with it, that it was like, okay, you can also work with Tamar, and, you know, you could be like background singer, dancers. I mean, they obviously had such a huge stage to perform with him on with the Super Bowl, but it was interesting that he did that again with twins who were actual twins.
Right.
Well, he liked twins. When I saw the Xanali video, and someone told me, I don't know if it was one of you ladies, but someone told me the name of the twins that were in the Xanali video, and I think they were in another video as well. And so I just think he had being a Gemini, and then his mother being a twin, just probably some fascination with twins, because it did seem that, or maybe it was just in his visual concept that he was always looking for symmetry. That could be something as well.
I just wanted to point out, Cabri, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but your comment about, you know, being flanked by two white women is a strategic marketing move. And I think that probably was also it. Whether it was, you know, his deliberate thought behind it, or it just kind of came out in that way, it certainly made a difference. And thinking about it now, it adds an interesting contrast to when you put the album on, you hear this extremely Black-centered foundational music. So, you know, again, you've got this interesting, beautiful cover art, it's lenticular, it does all this great stuff. And then you've got this music that is telling a very, very different story, and it's very intentional. So again, it would be amazing to have been able to ask him those kinds of questions or get into his head that way. But I think that's a great point.
Okay. Then to that point, as we are continuing with the women, Rosie Gaines. I keep referencing the Friday night video show with Daryl Bell, where it's TDK, Diamond and Pearl, but there's no band members there. And I tend to, it's like, why wasn't Rosie there? You know, like, why doesn't she get to be part of that visual presentation? But the musicians he tended to not have on those shows, because I'm thinking about Video Soul, it was Kat, Wally, like those types of folks then too, it was the dancers. So Rosie Gaines, obviously a pillar of the new power generation, and I have to just spend some time giving her flowers. What were your thoughts about her contribution to the band's sound and her dynamic with Prince, especially on the stage of the Glam Slam show?
Honestly, like, that was the best surprise of the Slam show for me, was watching Prince and Rosie interact, because I hadn't ever really seen that before. And watching the two of them together and feeding off of each other, and the energy and just the creativity, like, you could almost feel it like brewing between them as they went back and forth. Like, that was just the highlight for me, just seeing Rosie, like, you know, at her finest. It was incredible.
The look of love and admiration that Prince delivered when they were like singing together or had any type of interaction with excuse me, I'm tongue tied, interaction with each other on stage, you could see the look of love in his eyes when he gazed at her. Just watching that performance, because I just watched it not too long ago, just a second ago, before we jumped on here, just to see the way that he, you could tell that there was a connection with them musically and sonically, that I had never seen with him and another vocalist. Um, the way that he played off of harmonies with her vocals, and the way they played back and forth with each other was something to marvel and to really pay attention to. I can tell that he really had an admiration for her delivery and her vocal ability and her performance as well. I love seeing their interaction together and how they played off of each other. It was amazing.
I think Anil's point in the comments as well is so true, that there was definitely a different presentation in the way that Prince interacted with Rosie, but also the way that he presented her to the audience, as opposed to who he ended up working with as proteges and girlfriends. Sometimes the two, obviously crossed paths, but she definitely was given more of a angelic, beautiful spirit, strong energy, kind of respect, as opposed to like, I'm, sending out all these sex symbols onto the stage who may or may not be able to actually sing and or rap, but I know that Rosie is incredible. And I mean, still to this day, I feel like everyone in the community, I mean, I've never met anyone or interacted with anyone who doesn't have just the most, beautiful things to say about Rosie and how her voice just moves them. I mean, I could cry thinking about it, but with the remastering of this project, I mean, and just revisiting her vocals, it just gives me chills. Like, still to this day, this music has been out for so long. I've heard, Diamonds and Pearls, the song, 40 million times, but her riffs and what she does on that song, it's just amazing. And Prince definitely felt that impact as well, and he knew that.
There was one part on Cream on the transition when he said, I think he said, "I can listen to you all night." And it was the way that he said it, you could tell that he felt that way. He probably could sit and listen to her all night, and I'm quite sure he probably did. But I just love the way that he loved her and how much he showed his love to her.
Yes, yes. I was sharing with somebody not long, maybe right before the SDE arrived on my doorstep, listening to the podcast and the stories about Rosie. It kind of, for me, started at Celebration this year with the celebration of Rosie, and that was a very emotional thing. And I kept trying to understand, why am I crying? Why am I so emo? Oh my God, it's just Prince. Listen to this all the time. But I think it was realizing the significance that she played, not just for him and for, in the larger sense, what she did with the music, but for me as an artist at that stage in my life, again, being very young, I loved Jill. I loved Taunja. I loved, all of these other women who I was hearing through Prince's records. But Rosie was a voice. And as I was figuring out, where do I sing? Where does my voice sit? And to this day, I laugh about my musical theater mentor, Nedra James. Shout out to Nedra at Booker T. Washington High School for Performing and Visual Arts. Anyway, who used to make me put my head on the wall to feel the resonance. And when Rosie came into my brain space, if you will, and I heard that voice, it wasn't Aretha, right? It was a more contemporary feeling, like I can access this. I don't sing like Rosie in any sense, but it was just seeing someone with my favorite artist singing in a way that everybody kept saying to me, you can do this, you need to figure out, you need to learn, you need to do, but having that example. And I think that was why, in listening to particularly to the episode of the podcast that was all about Rosie, that it really made me emotional, because it was like, oh my God, I always talk about Taunja as being one of my favorite vocalists because she is. And, I love Jill's voice, and, I had those examples, but that's not where my voice sat either. I was just, mimicking what I heard on Prince records and on their records. But with Rosie, it brought something else to me. And I think for me personally, and then seeing this non-skinny, grown-ass Black woman. Again, I wasn't grown yet, but my body was doing some things. And so it's like, okay, again, being able to see the glamorization of her and the way that he positioned her and did not relegate her to the back, or did not just put her in an ugly ass frock that had no style and no shape and no color. All of that was so meaningful. Thinking back to, the difference between how Rosie, came across to us versus Bonnie. I don't really know what was happening with the styling with Bonnie, but it was very disappointing even then to see her in this kind of oversized shirt and some leggings with some stuff written down the side that didn't feel as intentional or as care filled as what we got to see with Rosie. And all of that played a role for me as a young woman trying to figure out my body and trying to figure out my voice. And now, of course, we have all these amazing examples of that with Lizzo and other girls. But, Rosie was that for me in a very real sense. And for that to have been a time, and I'm going to wrap this up, where you had other big voiced, big bodied Black women who were singing on these, international hits, but who were being represented in videos by dancer girls. That also was hugely important. And, I think I can't thank Rosie Gaines enough. If I were to ever have an audience with her, I would only be able to just say thank you. So I'm going to say that here on this celebration.
I mean, Prince loved a big Black woman soul singer. Let's just keep it real. And it wasn't just Rosie, it was Bonnie, it was Rosie, it was Shelby, as someone mentioned in the chat. I mean, this is a man who revered Chaka Khan, and who revered her to the point where we all know the story of how he met Chaka and told her that he was Sly Stone. And she comes to the studio and it's like, who is this little Negro and why am I here? And so you get this sense with even he worked with Angie Stone on a song, You Make My Soul Sing. I think that is so underrated. He loved that vocal prowess of some of these singers that he had along with him. And I respectfully want to disagree a little bit with Anil's point that Rosie wasn't centered. I think she was centered musically. I think that the songs that we know, that we think of when we think of Rosie, are the songs that she was very dominant on, from Diamonds and Pearls to Nothing Compares to You. And I think the idea that she wasn't necessarily sexualized by Prince, I don't think that takes away from her as a sexual being. And I say that to say that a lot of times when we have these big soul singing sisters, we don't think of them in a sexual way based on our experience. And so it's not that Rosie's not a sexual being because Prince might not have put his thing on Rosie. And I think that's a point that we need to make, because we saw Prince with all kinds of women personally and professionally, and later in his career when he was working with Liv and he was working with Shelby and he was working with these various singers that were amazing vocalists and brought these visuals to his show that were so different. When you see Shelby, who is a brown-skinned, bald-headed Black woman, she's not a super thin chick. And you saw the way that he brought her to the forefront. All of those things are really significant when you're looking at it. You're talking about a spectra that, sure, it includes Maite and it includes other people, Diamond and Pearl that we just talked about, and it includes so many other women that he works with. But you have the Shelbys, you have the Angie Stones, you have the Chaka Khans, you have Mavis Staples. Let's not forget that Prince recorded Mavis, he recorded Chaka in a time when nobody else was really trying to give them record deals or take their contributions seriously. So we've got to look at Prince in a totality of the musicians that he dealt with. But Rosie, I think, was one of the ones that everybody references as one that could go toe to toe with him vocally, also, and be really impactful in the way that they work together, as we're seeing in that Glam Slam show. But when I think of Rosie, I think of Dr. Feelgood, and that performance that she and Prince did, where they are just playing off of each other. She's grinding out the scatting and the jazz and the funk and the R&B, and it's all coming together, even more so than what she does with him in this Glam Slam show. Dr. Feelgood is like, I feel like they're vibing off each other. It's, to me, that's probably my favorite thing they ever did together. So Rosie, I don't think that she was diminished at all. I think that overall she was one of, when we talk about Bonnie, when we talk about Rosie, when we talk about Shelby, one of the vocalists in all of the years that Prince worked that we have enormous respect for, and that she's very centered in his legacy and in his music of that particular era.
Okay. Then before we get into some of the glam stuff, we can't forget about Carrie. So we got to hear from her in the podcast with Andrea Swinson. And what was your impression of her between Prince's memories he shared decades later in his biography, and then how he depicted her in Schoolyard and her response to that depiction?
One small thing I'll mention is that there's been an ongoing reference throughout the past 7 years, as all of the people who have worked with or interacted with Prince at some point in their lives have come out of the woodwork to, try to claim certain things. There's been an ongoing thread, though, where people will say that Prince purposely meshed different stories and people that he knew or people that he worked with knew and their family members, and he kind of meshed them together so that there wasn't one true line to what he was writing about or singing about. So when people do come out and say, this was about me, or he used my name for this or that, it's likely that it's not on purpose a true depiction of, oh yes, this is the exact person I was talking about. In the case of Carrie, I do feel for her in her expression on her, side of the story, because it's her name and people were able to put together like, well, you did know each other at this time and this is the actual person. So here is the story that he's saying happens. And you're saying, no, it wasn't like that. But I personally don't take anything in his songs as being an A to Z, this is the person and the story, and this is exactly how it happens, because I'm already listening to it in terms of it being a meshed up version of different stories together. But that's just my personal take on it, because I've heard so many people say that same thing. It's like, oh, I told him this story about my cousin and he used that name or a piece of that and put it with another story. And so I do feel for someone if they are referenced in that way and their, side of the story is so different. But I personally just wasn't reading it that way from the start. I wouldn't have, we all heard Schoolyard before. I think we all did before the release of this. And I just didn't hear it and think, oh, this is 100% true story that happened to him at that time. I just feel bad that it was the name of an actual person that, Andrea was able to connect with and say, well, here's the person. And now she could tell her side of the story. Just a silly random reference. I don't know if anyone saw that with the Golden Bachelor, with the recent reality show, that there was a person on it who apparently went like all the way to the end. She was the second person that the Golden Bachelor was narrowing it down to. And she, came out the gate saying Sexy Dancer was written about her, Leslie, and that she dated him. And, I immediately, when I hear all these stories, it's like grain of salt with that. Like, I don't, I feel like everybody in Minneapolis has their claim to fame with like, I used to date Prince and we had a dance battle at Glam Slam and then he wrote this song about me. So I guess just because of that history and hearing so much of that, I was always like, yeah, I don't take any of these stories as being 100% true. I just felt bad that this one was so explicit, and then, you know, someone who's gone on to live their own life and have their kids and everything, and they're like, oh, that's not what happened, you know.
So Leslie's story is actually true. She is
Oh, okay.
She's Robbie Pastor's sister. And well before she became part of the Golden Bachelor, I went to, so Robbie Pastor was Prince's valet for many years and then worked for Maxwell for many years. And if you see, there's a clip, what is it from? There's a clip online where you see a guy with a long mullet and he's talking about foo-fooing Prince's hotel rooms. That's Robbie Pastor. And so he told me many moons ago that Leslie was Prince's first white girlfriend because Robbie, Bobby, and Prince all knew each other because somehow or another, and Robbie was not completely clear as to how it all happened, but they all were musicians. Robbie and Bobby are cousins, and they all just jammed with Prince years before he became famous. They were all musicians. They jammed with him. And then Robbie, I think the story that he told me is that he just knew he was only going to go so far musically. And so he ended up working with Prince for years. So that, and not necessarily that he wrote Sexy Dancer for her, but she is a dancer. Or was apparently, and that's the story that Robbie told me years before Golden Bachelor. So when I saw that she was on there, I hit him up and I was like, wait, you told me that story about your sister. So that was just a funny little tidbit in this whole Golden Bachelor thing. But, you know, as far as Carrie, I mean, you know, pom-poms in the Prince memoir, Carrie, I think she's the cheerleader that has the pom-poms. To 60-something plus year old Carrie, obviously may be very different people. I know for me personally, had Prince mentioned me in any song, and I still think that when he says the Tonya, that was for me. I would have been like, oh, that Prince is so crazy. I can't believe he wrote that song. Child, none of that happened, you know, but apparently she was kind of offended. So I don't know whether she is now much more of a conservative person and, you know, was thinking, I don't want my grandkids knowing that this is how Prince remembered me. So I get where she was coming from with that. I don't necessarily think, like you said, that everything that Prince wrote was absolutely the case. It seems like he wrote things that came from some experience in life that he then turned into a good song. And, ooh, what rhymes with this? Oh, Carrie, or, you know, or what story is going to sound good if I put it in this particular song? You know, before we knew that Carrie was a real person and we heard that song, we just thought it was a document of Prince's in his young shenanigans, in the same way that J. Cole writes about a sexual encounter in a really brilliant song that somebody here will tell me the name of because I'm completely blanking on it, but great song about a sexual encounter, a coming of age kind of sexual encounter. And that's all that I thought that was. And I'm sure if he were around today and he, you know, he may not have wanted that song put out. This is also not a song that he chose to put out. So he may have said, this is going to be part of my personal stash that I made, but I wouldn't want to embarrass. I don't think Prince would want to embarrass or make anybody feel badly. So I think in remembering in the context that this is not something that he decided to put out himself, then I just think it's too bad that she felt badly or felt embarrassed or insulted by what he said. But certainly I think it gives you a sense of Prince as a young man, and in terms of also being in conjunction with the memoir, that, you know, he was a young man like any young man. He saw somebody who we thought was hot and, you know, decided because he was a musician to make a song about whatever encounter took place. So it's just too bad that she felt negatively about it. Because as I said, if it had been me, I'd have been like, Prince, he put me in a song, but, you know, he's so silly. That didn't happen. You know, that's kind of how I would have taken it. But obviously she has the right to feel how she feels.
I will say I've never heard the song. I also have a couple of things. One, I still haven't read his autobiography because every time I open it, I cry and you can't read through tears. And so I just have to set it aside and try again another time. Also, I do want to clarify that The Most Beautiful Girl in the World is about me. Everybody knows this. I don't know why there's debate in the chat, but let's just put that out there. But in all seriousness, I hadn't heard the song before. I'd heard of it and people talking about how kind of it is. And when I listened to it, I was like, yeah, when this ain't a jam, I'm good to skip it. I get the picture. But again, in listening to the podcast interview, I kept thinking to myself, "Woo, this is tough," because you want to interview somebody who is interested in having the conversation, and you hopefully, at least for me, when I would interview artists, I want to make sure that the subject feels good about what we're discussing about them. And it was very clear, and I think that Andrea did a brilliant job of trying to kind of bring things around, because there was some sticky answers to questions tossed Carrie's way, and I think that Andrea did a brilliant job of kind of putting some patina on it, so it didn't feel as prickly as it could have, but it still felt very prickly. And I think, again, as a songwriter, Law and some other folks have said this in the comments, you fictionalize stuff. Sometimes you're writing exactly about what happened to you. Sometimes you're writing somebody else's story. Sometimes you're just looking at people on the street and coming up with narratives. But I also think that it's a weird song to include. And I think this was alluded to on one of the panels yesterday. It was a weird song to include because it just doesn't feel like there's as much context behind it as there is with some of the other material. So it was an interesting interview to hear, but I had no other connection to Carrie. And so it didn't feel as close to me as some of the other episodes of the podcast.
Okay, just reading here. Okay, so let's now move into the Glam Slam. I'm looking at our time. We have about 20 minutes. So thinking of the other concert footage we've gotten from previous SDEs, what are your thoughts about Prince's performance style at this point in his career as compared to previous iterations of this style?
I'll just say quickly, I'll let everybody else talk, because I think that this show is just universally amazing and praised by any and everyone that sees it. And it just kind of validates, I think, this entire community, because we're all the soldiers who are out there all the time trying to tell people that Prince is the best of the best. And I love that there are so many people now that are seeing even miniature clips circulate on social media, and it's piquing their interest to say, oh, wow, I guess you guys are right. This guy is the best. And hopefully it propels people to seek out some more. I think that it's come up a few times in these panels the past couple days that most of us kind of feel that this should have a wider release, and that people should be able to access just the show for that reason, because casual fans are not going to lay out the money to really, purchase hundreds of songs if they're not as familiar with Prince yet. But this is like a gateway for them. If they see the show, I think it can convert a lot of people. But I'll just end by saying that I think that this show represents so much joy. I think that Prince seems really true to himself and relaxed, and it is just him hanging out with people that he grew up with, and just feeling himself in such a comfortable manner that it resonates with whomever watches it, that it's him not feeling as rehearsed. And if you went to the Beyonce Renaissance tour, if you just saw the movie, if you did both, there is a reference to that I appreciate so much from her. I adored the show and the movie. But she admits that about herself at this point in her career, at 42, that she's like, so much of my career was about being perfect, Virgo love, that she just was so rehearsed and so on point that she wasn't allowing herself to just be a little looser and funny and more relaxed in her performance. And that definitely translated with the Renaissance tour and the Renaissance movement. There were mistakes, there was silliness, there's more of her just interacting with the crowd on the fly. And, myself and others appreciate that more. And you can see that she's kind of been afforded, because of the fruits of her labor leading up to this, that it's like, now you can just let it go. Like, everybody knows you're the best at your craft, like, and you can just have a good time with it. And I feel like that's what Prince shows in that show, that it's like, you already know I could do all this. You already know I'm the best. And now I'm just going to have a good time, like in my club with my music and my friends.
I saw the Glam Slam show, like a lot of you, last year at Celebrations. My very first time, obviously, seeing that show. And I didn't see the Diamonds and Pearls tour or anything of that nature. I didn't see Prince live for the first time until the Jam of the Year tour. So I only had whatever had been released in video form on VHS or whatever, you know, I might have seen snippets of like on MTV or something as my reference point. In the leading up to like, you know, the Arsenio shows, which that's live, but it's still, you know, television. So it's very specific. And in 2018, when I went to Celebration and they did the Prince live on the big screen from, was it Welcome to America, whatever tour that was. I had seen that show in real time in person. So it was great to relive it, but it was like, and it was amazing. But seeing that Glam Slam show at Paisley in that way the first time was incredible. And I just remember my first thought being, oh, I know it's hot in there and I know it's funky. I mean, it's funky on the stage and it's funky in the audience because we're all sweating on each other. And that's amazing. I love that feeling of being in a small space with people who are having an amazing time and everybody is just flinging sweat. But yes, the joy, the 50,000 people on the stage, having just enough space to do a full out show. And then hearing that technically it's a rehearsal. So it's like, we're about to go out, we're taking the show out, doing this for the first time. All of that it was like sensory overload. It was incredible to see. And it made me wish again that I had had the opportunity back in the late 80s and early 90s to see Prince perform live. Because by the time I saw him in 97 or 98, you know, he was doing some different things. He was kind of on his spiritual thing. He was preaching a lot, whatever, which was great. But, you know, again, to kind of get to see freaky, nasty Prince in his prime was amazing. And seeing these clips again, you know, watching it again now with the SDE and seeing, you know, the different videos that have popped up on YouTube from the estate and things that fans have put together. He was so freaking gorgeous. I mean, that goes without saying. He was from the day that he was born. He's a beautiful human, but he was just so fine. And it was like, oh my God, Booty, come through. Like, let us see this. And he seemed very, very settled in himself. And I think yesterday on the Next Generation panel, one of the young brothers mentioned that, you know, you get into kind of your 30s and you start to figure out who you are and you begin to settle into that. And I think that at almost 50, I can look at that and say, yes, that is exactly what it seemed like was also happening, that he was settling into his sexiness in a way that had not happened before. It was still overt. It was still like, I mean, that whole little clip where he's talking about going home, like when I don't think I noticed that during the show at Paisley, and maybe they cut that part out, but when I heard it again in the SDE, and I was like, oh, what? He just said what? Like, he can still blow my mind all these years later and make me blush. And I just, in thinking about the show, again, from a musical perspective, as an artist, you know, my band and I used to obsessively watch the Sign of the Times video when we were recording and rehearsing. I know D'Angelo and them talk about that as well. To me, this would be the new standard. Like, this is the show we're going to watch. This is where we're going to get our cues from. This is how we are going to reinvent our own showmanship and our own musicianship, because that show is so tight. And it's just, it's miraculous. That's about as best as I can sum it up.
I think this is the closest we will get to actually being able to see an after show and experience that at home, because a lot of people didn't get a chance to experience that. But the energy that was given that night on that performance is the same type of energy that you got when you saw him in these small spaces after concerts. And can we talk about Insatiable for a second? Like, that is just pure sex. Like, there's nothing else that you can really say about it. And the way that he conveyed it in that live performance, it's something that, you know, a lot of people don't do. They don't take the art form of performance and delivery to that manner anymore. There are a few artists that still do, but I don't feel like a lot of our, especially with some of our younger artists that come out, they don't look at their performances as full bodies of work like he did, like actually putting together a whole cohesive show that tells a story that takes you from the joys and pains of relationships, from one extreme to another, and tell that story and actually have a concept for their performances. I think this would be a great tool for, I mean, are they even A&Rs anymore? Because now artists just sell singles. But I think this will be a great study point for artists to really look at how, you know, you can sell an album and tell a whole story with a performance. I just love everything about this. I will say I was at Paisley Park, and Diamonds and Pearls is not on my top 5. It's not on my top 10. I don't even think it's on my top 15. But I look at it with a whole different eye. I listen to it with a completely different ear after seeing that performance and reliving everything with this set. So kudos for putting this set out, because at first I was mad about it, but now I'm really happy that it did come out, and I understand why it was his second largest selling album. And with having this live performance with it really is the icing on the cake on why it was such a great project. And I actually believe I'm saying this. It was a great project, kind of disconnected in some points, but altogether, that performance sealed the deal for me.
That performance, it felt like a love letter to Minneapolis. It just felt, there were so many Minneapolis shout outs in it. There was, you know, Tonya calling out Minneapolis. There was, and I just thought, I was thinking about it from Prince's point of view, you know, what would that have felt like, right? Like, it was almost like here he is in his own club with his own band now from the North Side, essentially, and, you know, where he had come from, and thinking about the way in the Phyllis Wheatley Center and battles of the bands. And now here he was, right? Like in his prime, right? With this band, it's just an incredible thing to think about. And I think maybe that was like part of the joy. But also a little bit of a challenge, right? Because there's one point where he says, do you know who I am, right? Do you know who I am, Minneapolis? He's challenging the assumptions about him as he steps into this new era. But there's so much, I mean, I think too, I wonder if Sacrifice of Victor is so effective in this setting, because it's about, you know, his childhood and busing in the city of Minneapolis. And it's just, it feels so, you know, immediate in this show. But yeah, to me, it's just like, he's home, right? He's in his element, and the joy is definitely palpable.
I just want to say Blade Brown's comment too about like the crowd's proximity to him and having such a strong energy exchange because they were so close. You know, that coupled with Taunja's point about this being the true energy of like an after show. I know that the after shows were so powerful because you weeded out people that may have just come to a tour because it's the cool thing to go to a Prince show. There's executives with free tickets. There's casual fans that I dragged along with me just to try to convert them. You know, that's at the tour shows, the rehearsed, you know, professional shows. But if you're going to wait outside till 3:00 in the morning in all types of weather, you know, standing out, you know, at 2:00 in the morning outside, you know, clubs, and wait for him to pop up and start performing and all that, like, you're a real enthusiast. And so there was definitely that energy from him, and, you know, understanding that the people that are here, you know, really are here because of the support and the love.
This is Prince at the apex of his powers. And this is the show that when someone says, well, I don't know why you're so into Prince, this is the show that you show them. And this is the show that I am trying to figure out how to screen for multiple people here in Philly, because I just feel like it is something that explains itself. I don't have to say, hey, come see Prince. It's going to be amazing. Once it gets started, you will be pulled along by the wake of the talent of this incredible man and artist. everything about this show. This is those of us who were able to go to after shows, when you think about how tight and hot most of them were, because when somebody said Prince was doing an after show, you were going to stand outside, you were going to do what you needed to do to be in there, because you felt like you got invited to something that not everyone was going to be able to get to go to. It was a moment. These were, when you think of Prince doing 2 to 3 hours on stage and then going and doing another 2 or 3 hours in an after show, when you think of someone who has been that generous with their musical gifts, that cared about music and loved it that much, that he was going to go and play a whole nother show where he was not going to play anything that he necessarily played in that first big arena show or whatever he was doing. This is a show where you feel the heat, you feel the music, you feel the genius. I was watching a little bit of it, as Tonya said she was beforehand, and I stopped at Sacrifice, and I was like, wait a second. We are talking about, in this one song, where you see gospel, hip hop, funk, R&B, and soul all come together in this one performance. The Steels took that to so many heights, and that's just in the middle of the show. I looked again, I was like, did they end the show with this? Because the funk was popping, and I was just watching that, thinking of how many elements in 1991 that he was bringing to the table in that one particular song. And then looking at the outfit changes, the fact that, Prince is jumping up and down and dancing and singing and playing the guitar and playing piano and then dancing on the bar. And I'm looking at the guys, when I saw it again, I didn't notice the first time that they were partying along with him, dancing on the bar. And I'm thinking some guy went home and said, I saw Prince last night, and man, his entire ass was right there in front of me, like right there. Like what a memory to have. But it's just, you see an artist at the height. There's so many audio versions of after shows that I have, and you feel the energy and you feel it. And when Prince was even younger and he would do those after shows and he'd be cursing and saying MF and this, that, and the other. And in the rehearsals where he's so funny, this is just the apex of everything that was great about him. And the outfits, I'm just like, the jumpsuits, the jewelry, everything. But so you have the presentation along with being this stellar musician that can do all these things and is doing them and has this crack band that is executing on your vision. And it just brings everything fantastic about him together. And as Miss TLC said, I went to see both Renaissance, the concert film, and the Taylor Swift concert film. And amazing money put into those productions. Taylor, I don't know her music, so I didn't connect to it. It was 3 hours long. I stayed for 2. The staging, every single thing that went along these huge stages. The Beyonce show, 160 trucks that she said it took to put that show on. Such an elaborate stage that they were building one stage at another arena while they were doing the show in another one. But there's still, and it made me sad, the Beyonce show, a little bit at one point when I saw people screaming and going crazy and all those kinds of things. And I was like, I will never have that feeling again of what it's like to go to a show and get dressed and be excited to see the artist that has made so much of a difference in my life, and to get dressed because, Beyonce told everyone to wear silver, Prince would tell everyone to wear purple. But it just feels like artists today, they have a blueprint, they work with it as artists have done throughout time. But the feeling in that small show and many of the small shows is also Prince feeling free. Beyonce talked a lot in her concert film about people coming together and feeling free. And I feel like when you see those shows, Prince was on that exact same thing because he was feeling so free. He was like, I got this. I'm in my power. I'm in my bag. He's in his bag in that Glam Slam show. And he's in his bag in his own spot. This is his place. This is his club. And Prince being so ahead of his time, and having the internet and having the clubs and having all these ancillary things that artists do right now, because you can't make money like you used to selling records, that he was doing all these things so many years ago. But without the music, without the showmanship, there are times when you watch Prince in some shows. There's a show in Detroit, I think, on Musicology, where they had the big cymbal stage, and you feel like you're watching a revival. You don't feel like you're watching a concert. And this felt like, I don't know, is he a band leader? He's all these things. He's a band leader. He's a religious leader. He's bringing, everybody here just to appreciate and enjoy this gift that he just shared with us so generously. And I think that's all epitomized by this show.
Wow, is that everyone? Did we end exactly on time at 3:30?
and it birthed the hashtag to continue with justice for Jughead. That's what the show also did.
Oh, that on it. But Tonya, when you were talking about Beyonce, I'm wondering if anybody else noticed this, but Prince was in that Renaissance performance. So there was a transition that she did, and is like a couple of seconds, a sexy dancer. And it made me scream in the theater, because I didn't catch that in the live performance, but in the theater, I was like, she is still, paying homage to her Prince. And I love that she did that. I know she did it, and I know it was intentional.
Well, she integrated Blow too, and Blow is such a Prince love letter.
It's just that, I think that feeling that people had in those shows. I didn't connect to Renaissance like that, so I didn't go to the show, but I wanted to see the concert film, and just how much you have to do when you're an artist, right? All this stuff that goes on behind the scenes that nobody sees, how the even building the stages and the trucks coming in, and you think of those big tours, like the people, how long did it take to put together the cymbal stage for Musicology, which I always thought was just genius, the way that Prince did that, so that he's in the middle and everybody has a good view on that tour. And you think of all of these things that these artists do behind the scenes, and how tough a job it is to be an artist. And in Prince's era, there was enormous respect for him, but we didn't know everything that was going. Prince was, a band leader, a musician, branding, a marketing expert. He was doing so many of those things himself. But this is a show, I think, that Glam Slam show, that really is, when you distill it all down, it's just him at the genius, just really being able to show you all those, the charisma, all of that. And despite these lavish productions, and despite all of the things that you see in both of these tours, and kudos to Beyonce and Taylor Swift, self-made women who are able to mount these huge tours, make so much money. There's just something that there's an authenticity, and maybe this is just because, hey, it's me. There are people that are going to look at it and say that, people that they love now, the Hers of the world, the Lizards, the Beyoncés, whoever it is, that they feel authentic to them. It doesn't always feel to me that Beyonce doesn't just sit down and have a meeting before each album and say, what's hot? What should we do? How should we make this work? I'm not saying that Prince didn't do that, because I'm sure sometimes he was like, maybe even with Diamonds and Pearls, he was like, how can I maybe be a little bit more mainstream? Because Prince was a marketer. He was a marketing expert. But when you see those things distilled down into this kind of performance, you're like, this is just what, as people said in the liner notes, and have discussed at length about him, he just loved music. He loved the craft. He wasn't in it for the money. He wasn't in it for the women. He wasn't in it for the fame. All those things came with it. But he was really, really somebody. And this is across music or any other area or field, that just loved it, and was honest to the craft, and was authentic to the craft, and cared about being great. Maybe ultimately to his detriment, the saddest part of that. But his generosity with his gift not to get all biblical because I'm not religious, but there's the parable of the talents where they talk about how and someone more religious will clear this up if I get it wrong, but that when we're giving gifts, we're meant to share them. We're meant to express them and share them and be generous with them. And I just always think about him when I think about that, because he was so generous with his gift and with his love for what he did.
Okay, then that's our time today, everyone. Thank you for being here with us, Miss Tonya, Miss TLC, Miss Taunja, Miss Rhonda, and Laura. It was an honor to moderate you today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been
Thank
great.
You were wonderful,
you.
Lisa.
So good
Thank you.
I love
everybody.
seeing all these beautiful.
Yes.
It's been
It's
fun.
great. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you so much. Thank you, KaNisa, for doing double duty today. I know I asked a lot of you, so I really appreciate that you were up for doing both today. That means so much to me. And thank you to each and every one of you. You guys always give such amazing information and always bring the context that is so sorely needed to situate Prince in certain time periods. And I think it's really important to have that context around the Diamonds and Pearls release. So thank you so much for everything that you said today. And you guys were obviously the best dressed. So I just got to say that. So I'm going to have to manually take you each off the stage. So please bear with me. And thank you. Thank you, Taunja. I just love the purple on your glasses. Thank you, Tonya. You're the best. All right. So we are down to one more round table. Can you believe it? I cannot believe it. The time went by so super fast. So let's talk about what's going on next. We're going to take a longer break than usual. We're going to have roughly 90 minutes to hopefully go eat, hydrate, move your bodies and whatnot. And also figure out what your situation is going to be for the next roundtable, meaning we're going to have a live commentary through YouTube and Facebook like we've been doing, but you have to screen your own copy of the Glam Slam show. And I know some of you guys are going, I don't have my own copy of the Glam Slam show. Well, you should have other Prince friends who have the Glam Slam Blu-ray. So see if you can, call somebody and say, hey, are you going to do this live commentary? Can I come over? Can I watch it with you? I hope that you'll do that. You got 90 minutes to make those arrangements. And then for everyone who's already set to do it, you have to figure out how you're going to do both. But I know that you'll figure it out because we did something similar. Remember for the Dirty Mind 40 GB 30 symposium where we had two live commentaries of two DIY screenings. We did the Dirty Mind Rich show, and we also did the Graffiti Bridge film. So remember back, it seems like 50 years ago, but we did that. So we're going to do it tonight with the incredible performance of Glam Slam. Everybody has to see it. And we're going to have 4 live commentators that I'm super excited about. My triplet, Camila Cummings. We're going to have Celie, who's always a blast, combined with Nicole, which is incredible that Nicole can join us. I so appreciate any Nicole comments, as well as my dear friend, Mr. Funk Jazz Cafe himself. And I love, love, love anything that Jason has to say about anything and definitely about Prince. So I hope that you will return after you've nourished your bodies and moved them and hydrated them. And yes, Camila, you remember. Do you guys ever remember the Judgy Angel DIY with Jill? That was such a great time. And yes, I can't wait for Nicole's hot takes. So it's going to be something really awesome, in my personal opinion. Let me see if I missed any. Did I shame someone, Kim? Who did I shame? I didn't think I was shaming. My apologies if I shamed someone. And then let's see. That's so funny, Camila. I have to get set up and grab a drop cloth for my drool. And yes, let's give a hand to the incredible roundtable with the ladies. Thank you so much, Modern Air, for your comment. Yes, this was tremendous. Thank you so much, all panel members again. Fantastic discussion. And yes, Olga, I cannot believe that we are already at the end of our 2 days together. It really flew by. Yes, this panel was filled with so much knowledge. And yes, thank you so much, Drea Dances. I actually want to, let me stop sharing here and go full screen. I have so much love for my What Did Prince Do This Week posse, who is spending the weekend with us. So I see you. I know who you are. And we're going to get back to What Did Prince Do This Week next week. But thank you so much for being here. And I love this DM, the New Honey Collective. That's interesting. I might have to keep that. Thank you so much. And let's see. There's so many comments. So thank you so much. And I think I'm going to bow out so I can actually take a break. And I hope that you will return so that we can watch collectively the Glam Slam 92 show, which to me is the cherry on top for the Super Deluxe edition this time around. I hope you agree. And we'll be back at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is New York City time.